This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. I am Brad Kelly. This is my co-host, Kevin Kautzman. Kevin, how are you doing?
Never better. We're coming off of Art of Darkness Live, Fitzgerald Part 1 and Winter Dreams here in beautiful St. Paul, Minnesota. We're back in the saddle.
Yeah.
We're back home doing it.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a bit of a high doing the first live show with an audience, getting to meet, a few of you people out there. That was awesome. So, coming again in 2024, details to follow in Detroit, in sunny, beautiful Detroit, Michigan is where we're going to do it. So, anyway, I'm also excited to talk about Andrei Tarkovsky. If you clicked on this link, you probably know that's what you're listening to. We, as people may or may not know, the way that this show works, we do a core episode on a subject, multiple hours, whatever it takes to tell the story about that person's life and work. We did an episode fairly recently on Andrei Tarkovsky, 3 or 4 hours, telling the whole life story, talking about the films. I'm trying to get people who don't get Tarkovsky to get Tarkovsky is what I tried to do. And hopefully I succeeded a little bit at that here and there. But we do those main episodes, those core episodes, and then we have this kind of episode called The Dark Room. We bring in somebody else who has a different perspective, maybe a deeper perspective, maybe just kind of an alternate perspective, or somebody who wants to talk about one of these subjects. And we go for about an hour. A little less structured, a little informal, and they often go into interesting places. And so to do that, we have brought the amazing, talented, brilliant Ewan Morrison. Ewan is the award-winning author of 8 novels, including most recently How to Survive Everything, which Publishers Weekly has called an outstanding thriller, and about which Ian Rankin has said, quote, "I wasn't sure there could be a great pandemic novel. Here it is." His novel Nina X, about an extraordinary young woman who is raised from birth in ideological purity in a commune cult and then escapes into our modern world, won, among other things, the Saltire Society Book of the Year Award, which is the biggest literary award in Scotland, and it is currently being developed into a film by director David Mackenzie. Morrison has also adapted his own novel Swung. The great Irvin Welsh has called Morrison one of the most provocative, intelligent, and original novelists working in Britain today. So we are honored, Ewan, to have you with us to talk Tarkovsky. First, just hello, how are you?
I'm good, guys, and thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think this kind of correspondence started up. We did our episode on Tarkovsky, and then I saw you were had some great insights. We're doing some poll quotes on Tarkovsky, sharing some images, and I reached out because I thought this guy is going to be able to tell me something even more about Tarkovsky, because even this was one. Just let me spill for a second. When we started preparing for that episode, I wasn't as deep on Tarkovsky as I am now. I hadn't watched everything. I hadn't read much about him. I didn't know much about him as a person. And like, I feel like in doing that episode, I only kind of made half the journey of totally understanding the Tarkovsky thing. So I'm very excited to talk to you. Maybe I can. Go ahead.
Yeah. That was one of these interesting little moments on Twitter where there was just this beautiful image which comes from Mirror by Tarkovsky, which is probably his avant-garde masterpiece. It's of a little bird landing on a boy's head, and there was just a little quote from Tarkovsky that I matched with it, which said that the death of childhood is the birth of poetry. And it was a bit of a conversation piece with people on the net, and some people were like, God damn it, that's a horrible thing to say. And other people were like, yeah, I totally get that. And it ended up having 1.5 million views.
Whoa.
So it was a viral thing. But it's just one of these unique freaks that sort of happens. So someone tweets about Tarkovsky and it gets over 1 million views. Yeah. It's nuts. Amazing. Because, Tarkovsky's probably, well, he's one of the more rarefied great directors of the 20th century. But I really think that he's got a bit of a cult following now because of the internet that he didn't have before.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a lot of people to discover it, and people are getting introduced to him in different ways, like with that post. I'm sure somebody, it sounds like more than one person, probably went and checked out a Tarkovsky film based on that tweet. I mean, 1.15 million. It's funny how those tweets work. You couldn't engineer a tweet to get 1.5 million, right? You couldn't figure it out beforehand and be like, that's the one. They have to, which is almost the Tarkovskian kind of thing in and of itself. Yeah. And I was kind of surprised too when we were doing the research to find that when Stalker came out on the Criterion channel for a while anyway, it was the most viewed film on Criterion, which, that's a huge library of films, right? That's a lot of stiff competition. So there certainly is a cult following out there. What is when I know you kind of caught on with that tweet but when you think of like Tarkovsky, is The Mirror the first film that comes to mind?
Well, I think it is for me. I think most people get pulled in with Stalker or Solaris, and some people get pulled in by the Steven Soderbergh remake with the absolutely captivating Natasha McLeod with those big eyes of hers. And it's like impossible to watch that movie and not be stunned by, beauty. Not just the beauty of her, but the cinematography. And that then leads people to Tarkovsky's third film, which was Solaris, which was the film that he didn't like. He felt he'd been compromised in the making of it. And interestingly enough, it was his reply to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it was one of the last films as well that he made with funding from the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, they had a sort of film school system where you went through film school and then you went on to become a director, and then you worked for Moz Films, which is short for Moscow.
So it was all vertically integrated, right?
All vertically integrated, state controlled. And Tarkovsky was this weird freak who was really into, mysticism and, under the table, he was probably like a Christian as well. And he was into dream sequences and the subconscious. And eventually, it became his sort of undoing with the Soviet system. But we can talk about that, a bit later. But he was producing increasingly non-Soviet friendly movies. And I think the one that pulled me in was Mirror, which was his fourth movie just after Solaris. And so it's a sort of impressionistic, dream-like story. It's actually biographical in that it was originally supposed to just be about his mother. I've got the pitch document for it that he gave to the Soviet Union, and it's really the story of a woman who's lived through the Soviet Revolution and has become old. It was supposed to feature interviews with his mother all the way through and was supposed to be a bit of propaganda. All that ended up on the editing floor if it was ever shot. And then you got this movie instead full of these exquisite long dream sequences with these huge tracking shots of, there's this beautiful image of a woman floating above a bed. I mean, I think everyone knows that image. It's so exquisite. And there's that other one as well of tracking through a peasant house and then coming across the view from the back door of a burning house beyond. It's just so and with children looking in the foreground. And these things were so stunning to see. I think probably unmatched in cinematic beauty in the history of cinema, and certainly they've gone on to inspire many other film directors. But it was the combination of the fact that this movie was just like a dream. I mean, from beginning to end, you were in and out of time, and you couldn't tell whether the mother was the same person as the wife, and jumping through 30, 40 years, and just it was all extraordinarily emotional for something that was so abstract. And
for it's as a plot wise, it's incoherent almost. Right?
It's almost impossible to follow. There's like a man who's dying of cancer, foreshadowing Tarkovsky's own death within a decade. There's negotiations over who gets a kid, again, foreshadowing stuff that happened in his own life when Tarkovsky, what's it called when you leave a country, like a vast country, and you do it discreetly and you're not allowed back again?
I don't know, sneak out. Right? He was a refugee, sort of. I mean,
he was a refugee in Italy, because he escaped from the Soviet Union, and then he had custody trouble with his child.
I don't know that he ever saw his children once he left Russia.
I think he saw his son once again. But it was many, many, many years afterwards. Sorry, I get caught up in the mythos of the film and the making of the films after having watched Mirror so many times to try to sort of crack it and to sort of work out how the hell it was put together. I mean, one of the really interesting things about it is that he tricked the Soviet Union into making an extraordinarily exquisite art house movie based on a dream. It was really, in the end, nothing to do with, the story of a woman who'd lived through the Russian Revolution. And the Soviet film authorities were absolutely furious. And they wanted to shut it down, like they pretty much shut down Andrei Rublev, which was his second film. But someone snuck a copy of the film out to the Cannes Film Festival. And then, it started getting all this praise and plaudits from the world's critics. So then the Soviet Union had their hands tied because they're going like, well, we have to prove that the Soviet Union is the best place to make movies. So we can't pull this movie or stop this movie being seen. So we'll just pretend that we were behind it from the start.
Right. Yeah, there were lots of interesting tactics they would pull on him to try and rein him in throughout his career. I know at one point, I think in 1980, they awarded him the People's Artist Award, which from my take was, one of the major art awards. And it seemed like at the same time, they were also not helping him in any way. And it seemed like they did that so when he left the country, nobody would believe that he's being sort of repressed, right? It's like, well, you're the people's artist. How could you possibly being sabotaged by your own government? They love you, right? Yeah.
I'll confess now too that I'm playing a little bit of catch up. I was watching Mirror today, and I made a terrible mistake because I was watching it on Prime with ads jammed in the middle. It was some of the most jarring, and it wasn't a proper screening, and I'm going to properly screen it for myself and keep an eye out too, because maybe an art house cinema I'd love to see it on the big screen, because I know that
that's just exactly like when I find one of these things on YouTube that says sleep for 12 hours listening to this calming noise.
Right.
And you put it on and you're an hour in, and then suddenly you go, hey, have you heard the latest? And it's like this stupid advert that wakes you up at 2 a.m, you know?
It had, and of course, very, I mean, just talk about irony. He makes this under the Soviet Union, and now it's being used by Amazon to sell burgers or something.
Yeah, right.
Just too strange. I wonder what he would think of that. He'd probably shoot the computer.
Oh
yeah. No, I don't think he'd like much about the modern world, actually. You know, there's actually a beautiful, pristine copy of, again, talking politics. Just after Russia invaded Ukraine, Mosfilm in Russia decided to put out all these classic films of theirs for free on YouTube, and really nice prints.
They look great. This is where I've watched.
Yeah. So you know, you can find Mirror and Stalker there as well. I'm not sure, or is it Solaris?
Stalker? Everything up to Stalker is there, I believe. Yeah.
No, those are just really fantastic places to watch his films.
Yeah, they're good. They're gorgeous. They did.
It's on render. Like, you know, HD, so you can plug it into your big TV and get the full effect as well.
Yeah, so it is interesting to me. The Mirror is one I'll probably I am going to have to watch again. But there is this interesting thing where he goes from Solaris to the Mirror, basically because you know, in our terms, I think he considered Solaris selling out, which is sort of fascinating because it is similarly. It's not like he made Transformers or something, right? I mean, it's similar. It's a very it's still a very high-minded film, in my opinion. Solaris is.
Yeah, and it's miles away from where the book was that it was, you know, that it was based on.
Have you read that? Have you read?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm such a Tarkovsky nerd. I tend to try to find the books that the films were based on. Yeah. So the whole thing with the making of Solaris as well, he felt really pressured, you know, to deliver something that was really a cheap sci-fi version of 2001, you know. So rather than having ornate sets that show your city, you know, whatever, him and his crew went off to Japan to shoot a section that they thought was the most sci-fi looking place in the world.
Right.
So there's a driving sequence in Tarkovsky's Solaris where you're like, whoa, why are they suddenly driving through Japan in the is it the late 70s? Yeah,
late 70s.
Like, you're like, it doesn't really look sci-fi at all. There's all these Japanese signs all over the place, but
right.
You know, he was compromised in many ways by the limitations, really, of the thing. But you know, he was trying to do. I guess he was trying to find a niche for himself where he could do metaphysical films that stuck underneath the web of like Soviet realism, right? So if you do stuff about space, you can talk about life and death and mortality and meaning and love and all these things, and the Soviet censors are not going to go, but it's not about the workers,
right?
You know?
Right.
It's not a heroic story about the workers.
I mean, a similar thing has been done in the United States with things like Star Trek and Twilight Zone, where you basically are able to make these allegorical stories in a fantastical context. And anybody who's really paying attention knows what you're actually talking about. But they're able to kind of slip by, and it's it's just a story about confronting an alien race. You know, what does that have to do with, you know, with the times we live in, right? Yeah.
Well, you know, it was kind of fascinating how much he managed to sneak in. So in Solaris, Solaris is the name of this planet that there's a sort of largely abandoned spacecraft that's orbiting scientifically, getting nowhere, finding out nothing about this planet. It turns out to be some kind of huge brain of some kind. But it also has some strange powers because it can make images and people manifest. So it can take the contents of your mind and your memories and turn them into real things. So it's plaguing the people on board the ship with memories of their loved ones back home. And for the protagonist, it's his ex-wife who unfortunately killed herself. So it's this huge, it's just a clever way of looking at, you know, meaning in life, I suppose. What's the meaning and purpose in life? And is there something beyond us, whether it's a an all-knowing planet, or whether it's God or something. All things that were very sneaky for a Soviet filmmaker to be doing.
Right. Well, and probably wrestling with the Soviet enforced materialism and taking that, stretching that as far as you possibly could, and then reaching into the mystic, even in that, under a regime enforcing that. Yeah.
Totally. And very, very cunning the way he did it. It's no wonder that his diaries, when you read them, they're so fraught. You know, he's always struggling. Yeah. Everything's always on the point of collapse, you know. Somehow
that's the one thing I noticed in doing the research on him. It's like nothing ever happened easily ever in the career of Andrei Tarkovsky. Like, not even when he got out of the Soviet Union, it didn't really get any easier for him. I mean, he didn't have to deal with the same constraints, but he had whole bunch of
other things. There's an amazing bit of documentary footage of the making of Nostalgia. Which was, hold on, just after Stalker. Is that right?
Yeah, between Stalker and The Sacrifice. Yep.
That's right. Yeah. So it was the first film he did when he'd I wish I had the name for it. He'd run away from the Soviet Union and he wasn't allowed back. It's
exile, self-exile.
Self-exiled. It's not. It's the name will come to me anyway. Okay. So he's working with an Italian film crew. And he's going to them through a translator. He says, I need 100 feet of fake fog, you know, all over that field. And the Italians are going, nah, don't be silly. And he's pulling his hair out going, oh, God, I can't work with these Italians. I can't work. What have I done? I should have stayed in the Soviet Union.
Can you imagine that? Oh, I should have stayed in the Soviet Union.
And then I could have seen my son. And but there's a little note in his diary where he says, after he finishes Mirror, he says, I think that's it for me. I'm going to give up and learn how to write books. And then you go, right. You're just about to do Stalker.
Right. Yeah, right. You're just...
it's, a masterpiece. It's like he had no idea that
which would then go on to be, I mean, that was maybe the most fraught of all his productions was Stalker, right? So I imagine he probably briefly quit making movies after every film he made.
I think, I think there was nothing more fraught than Stalker, that's for sure. Yeah, I don't know if folk listening sort of know the overall story of Stalker, do they?
They would. If they listen to the core episode, that they would know.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So three explorers in this wasteland trying to get to the place called the Room, and the actual filming of it. They did, I think, 6 months of filming in an entirely different environment, which was much more like a desert. Not the green, verdant, foliage covered place that you see in what's basically the reshoot. So they sent it. They were so far away from Moscow that they bundled all the stuff together, and to save money, they sent it in one batch to the labs, and the labs processed it thinking it was slide film, and it was actually negative film or something like that. So
it was at the time it was a new format from Kodak, and I don't think they knew how to handle it, and it may have been a bad batch of film too. They spoiled the whole thing. Yeah.
You know what? I discovered there's some images and some little bits of film of it and if the negs still exist, which I doubt it.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry to super nerd on the whole thing, but I would love to see that footage. And
I would totally watch that.
It could be digitally treated to bring it back now,
Oh, sure. That's the thing now is you could probably color grade it, and as long as it isn't just completely shot. You probably could restore it, but it's funny because the writing of it was similar. I mean, he brought on the brothers who'd written Roadside Picnic, and I had read at one point that they wrote 18 drafts, but I was recently reading another interview with one of the brothers, and it was more like 8 drafts. But a lot of times Tarkovsky would just read the script, and then he would basically say to them, "Yeah, this isn't it," but he wouldn't give them any direction on what he wanted.
Right. No, and that's kind of the way he worked with actors as well, though.
Oh my God. Right.
So he had this law of never interpreting the script for the actors. You never say, well, this is the bit where you're feeling like this.
Right.
And then the next scene where you're going to go on and you're going to feel like that. He never did that at all. He had to let them find it for themselves.
Yeah, and he would have real problems with that. There was an interesting anecdote about the guy who plays Chris Calvin, the lead of Solaris. I don't remember the actor's name, but he Tarkovsky was really disappointed in his performance or didn't like how it was going. And that actor was always asking, well, what's my motivation here? He was doing that sort of typical thing we think of as actors as doing, as in my opinion, seems like a natural part of their work, trying to figure out what does the director want. And Tarkovsky, hated that. And he apparently would spread a rumor amongst the crew that he was extremely disappointed in the actor's performance. And he did that intentionally to make the guy feel insecure, like to put that pressure on. He wanted him to feel insecure and uncertain and not like he didn't know what he was doing.
Shades of Kubrick.
Yeah,
definitely. And also, if you're going to get someone... Yeah, no, actually, that might be the best way to get an actor to look like they're actually on a space station.
Right.
Like if they're just completely freaked out that no one likes them and they don't know what they're doing and everything's dangerous. I mean, he does manifest that sort of edgy, I don't want to be here quality.
He does. He's sweating, he's kind of sweating all the time. And he's sort of, absolutely at work.
Now you could just make him scroll Twitter for 6 hours every day. Same effect.
Yeah,
that's true. That certainly can wipe out an entire day of my life if I have to go down that route. Try to keep it down at 20 minutes.
What do you, so I want to ask you, Ewan, as a writer, what do you make of, and you've got something being adapted now, you've adapted your own. What do you make of Tarkovsky's methods of adapting these books? Because a lot of his stuff, Solaris, Stalker, I mean, I guess everything else he more or less wrote or co-wrote, but
again, I think he was very naughty in as much as he would get locked off script and all the bureaucrats would agree on it, and then he'd change it when they were shooting without telling anyone. So there's a beautiful section in Stalker when the stalker is sort of in a sort of exhausted dream state, and he starts to give this beautiful talk about how life for people are like trees that when they're old they become brittle, and when they're young they can bend and they can adapt to anything. And it's a line from the Tao Te Ching, which is the Bible of Taoism, or rather it's a long piece that's taken from there. He's just plopped it in there, and the actor's gone off with it, and really, there's quite a lot of improvisation. I think this is the thing that people can't really duplicate. I know that Gus Van Sant had a good shot at doing the Tarkovsky mixture of improvisation and planned camera. I mean, usually when you have planned camera, really complex maneuvers on tracks and dollies and
which Tarkovsky sometimes did, or often.
He was ace at those things. You've usually got to have the actors really well blocked for that, like tape marks the ground marking the X, so they go like place B, place B, place C. But he would never do that. He was against any kind of blocking. He had to let the actors do things for themselves. So you have this almost impossible combination of the two things, and somehow he managed to pull it off.
Right.
It really is almost impossible, because if you've got a roaming camera, you have to have the actors hitting those spots.
Right. And he was doing long takes too. I mean,
very long. Yeah.
And sometimes I know the one that really, there's a number of them, but the one that really strikes me is I guess it's the opening shot of The Sacrifice, where they've got the tree at the beach and then it like goes all the way to the house. I don't think there's a single cut in there. And there's a guy, the postman is riding his bike in a circle around them. The conversation feels very natural. And it's clearly not blocked. Yeah.
A little kid fastens a rope, I think, onto the back of the bike, and then
that's right.
All this, all these shenanigans, and then you've got the, I think, 8 or 9 minute take at the end. Not to be a spoiler alert, but that's extraordinary as well, and deeply choreographed.
I mean, for people who we spoiled it. A building burns down in one shot from beginning to end. Yeah.
There's a lot of flames in Tarkovsky. I was just watching some of Andrei Rublev again, and there's the beautiful scene in Rublev where they're making the bell, out of poured metal that's been, poured into clay molds in the Middle Ages, and there's just this huge fire. I mean, I think that's one of the big things about Tarkovsky is these living processes that happen in real time. That's like a uniquely Tarkovskian thing. I think that other people have taken from it. Back to your question, though, about the adaptations that he did of the books. I don't rate the books as highly as I rate the films. So I think he took fairly dry sci-fi novels. So Roadside Picnic became Stalker, Solaris became Solaris. There was very little emotion and mysticism and love in those books, but there's just tons of it in the movie adaptations. You maybe get some of the aesthetics in Solaris the book, but it's a cold, dry read, in comparison. So I think he does that again. He's always a director of contradictions. On the one hand, you've got loose tracking shots with improvised behavior, impossible, and on the other hand, you've got metaphysics, and you've got deep emotion. Which the two things can be completely irreconcilable, but he manages to pull the two things together in his movies. So you find yourself sort of weeping about mortality. I guess that's the combination, isn't it, between metaphysics and emotion.
Yeah, another film that struck me like Mirror, which admittedly I need to properly screen, but it reminded me of Persona.
Yeah.
Brad, go ahead.
He was a huge Bergman fan, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Should we ask Ewan about what one of our Telegram people wanted to ask? Should I feed that question
I missed
Oh,
that.
see, I want to make sure I get that in. So we have an active Telegram at t.me/artofdarkpod, and our friend Nephilim in there. He commanded that we ask. He says, ask him about the place of poetry and philosophy in cinema. And he goes on a little more, and I'll read it. He says, because for me, in Tarkovsky, as also in French movies from the 60s through the 80s, explicit use of them, poetry and philosophy, harm the film. It says, by being said in dialogue, do you think trees have consciousness? Do they feel the same way as we do? Well, the implicit use of it brings the movies up to a higher level of masterpiece. So he's just sort of wondering about the place of poetry and philosophy in cinema. How do we feel about overtly including it? Because I think it seems to work in Tarkovsky. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. It seems to work in Tarkovsky, but it's pretty mortifying when you come across it elsewhere, because it comes across as an attempt by the director to elevate the intellectual level of what's going on. It comes across as pretentious. But I think, specifically in Mirror, there's two poems by Tarkovsky's father, Arseny Tarkovsky, and they're read in this rhythmic, dreamlike sort of way. Oh, there's a poem in Stalker as well, actually. Again by Tarkovsky's father, again not in the script. But I think Tarkovsky does it. I think he just lulls you into this sort of sleep-like, dreamlike state where you're going to accept a bunch of things that are not quite normal anyway. And the voiceover poems tend to just sort of flow with the images, the way the images are flowing. And I think so there's the beautiful section in Mirror where there's a poem and you're watching wind through trees and then wind blowing over some bread and a glass on a table, and then children running, and you're wondering what's the connection between the two things, and you're like, I don't even care, because it's so beautiful and the reading's so beautiful. So you're in this sort of, I guess it's non-illustrative. That's the main thing. It's to go with the dreamlike state in Tarkovsky. And I think when other directors try to include poetry, it tends to be a bit, look at me, I'm being clever, and tends to be a bit illustrative, or some people will include philosophy for a laugh, like Hal Hartley, used to do quite a lot of, existentialism in there, but it was funny. So I think there always has to be some, whether it's to take it into the dreamlike state or to take it into humor. There are ways you can sneak these things in, or use them to bring another level, I guess, to the filmmaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I'll co-sign that.
I think it works. You're totally right though. I mean, it would be very easy in lesser hands for some of that stuff to feel sort of tacked on, even like, now they're going to tell me a poem.
You see it a lot now, where it's almost become a save the cat level type trope, where the character's reading Camus, like the do you know? And it's like it's that kind of movie.
This is like Save the Cat 5.0.
Yeah.
It's like don't save the cat. Get them reading Camus instead.
Where it's like the first draft of the screenplay just said in that part, something meaningful here. We'll get something meaningful in there later.
Yeah. But I don't think Tarkovsky uses it cheaply. Yeah, go on, Ewan.
No, for sure. I think that there's a whole issue of memes anyway. Like, today's memes just flood the internet with things that sound intelligent or thoughtful. That sounds really clever. It's only two sentences. And one of the things that freaks me out and makes me laugh about memes is how many of them are misattributed. So they're just given to the wrong philosopher completely. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful. When you plop these things in, you might be doing it.
You might stop at a period, and what you don't realize is in the original text, the next sentence basically counters that or inverts it somehow.
I know. Then you're going to look like an ass, because there'd be some person in the audience on their phone going, "That wasn't a quote by Plato, actually."
I'm sure we've committed a few of those.
Why not? Why not?
But I think as writers here, we all aspire to be misattributed later in life.
To be popular. To be popular enough to be misattributed would be fantastic. Yeah.
Sounds good, right? That sounds absolutely good.
It feels like I would have said that. Yeah, sure. All right.
But see, there's moments in these films that I think do fall into the sort of philosophical, the poetic moments that you mentioned, Ewan, but also like, man, I keep coming back to The Sacrifice, and since I watched it, it was the last thing I watched before we did our main episode, and I had never seen it before, and I keep thinking about it. But it's sort of at the beginning or at the end. Wait, how does it even work now? At some point, the little man, the boy, says, "What did they mean in the beginning was the word?" And there's just this moment to me that is like, it's one sentence. It's sort of philosophical. It's not plots by any means. Like, it doesn't, the movie is fine without, the movie as a narrative is fine without it, but I find that incredibly evocative, right? Just coming out of this boy who hasn't said anything else throughout the movie. So yeah, I don't know. I guess just wanted to put my 2 cents in. The poetry stays in the picture. That's what I say.
There's this great sort of philosophical undercurrent in nostalgia as well. So the stories about a Russian translator who's investigating the trip that another Russian composer took 100 years ago. He's writing a book on it. He's getting a bit bored of being in Italy and pining for home, and he's terribly sick, and he meets this mad ranting man who'd hidden his children away because he thought the apocalypse was coming. And there's this actual brilliant philosophical and political speech at the end of Nostalgia, where the madman gives a talk in a square in Rome and throws all these pages in the air and sets fire to himself on the back of a statue of, I think, Marcus Aurelius. But he's talking about basically a lot of the things that we talk about today, which is technological alienation and how we don't see each other anymore. And it's a beautiful speech, and it's minutes long. So that was an example. I guess there's another way to get philosophy into a movie or politics even, is to have someone ranting and setting fire to themselves at the end of it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you can pair it with a dramatic action of some kind, then it immediately bonds it to the narrative in a potent way. For sure.
For sure, there's like consequences of the belief. Then it's not just the director who's just telling you something. Yeah,
sure. I think one of the arch examples of that, one of the great examples of that, is Naked. With David Thewlis, for what it's.
That's a hard going film about nihilism, isn't it?
Indeed, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
with consequences.
God,
Yeah,
in fact, now that I
likely.
think, yeah, no, he's ruined by his own lack of faith in anything, and just that sarcastic knee-jerk reaction that the Thulis character has in Naked. He just can't stop insulting people and putting them down, and all the time he's basically telling them your life is shit and meaningless. Like that guy, he winds up, he says, "What kind of job you doing?" It's just a security guard.
Yep.
He goes, a monkey could do that with a stick. It's like you walk around here, you check in your time. Monkey could do it with a stick. I think the guy chases him out, maybe even beats him up. But I mean, you get a sense Thulis has it coming, you know?
Indeed. Well, taking us a bit afield, but yeah, it can be done. For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, I think when you got a philosophical theme, then you'd have to talk philosophy, you know?
To some degree, yeah. I mean, some of it can be embodied, certainly, but there's always going to be, it's always complex. I mean, and there are ways of finding your way to it, right? But yeah.
I think that's why Tarkovsky tried to get funding to do 2 books by Dostoevsky, because Crime and Punishment and wasn't Karamazov.
I think it was The Idiot.
It was The Idiot. It was The Idiot, indeed. Because Dostoevsky's philosophical questions are always so grounded in their protagonist problems, you know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's a sort of Dostoevsky's a master of that, of embodying those things. Absolutely.
It would have been quite something to have had the old Dostoevsky Tarkovsky combo.
It would have been.
It would have been a good team. Although yeah. No, I think it would have been good.
Can I ask you? I'm going to assume that you are familiar with this book, Sculpting in Time.
I'm indeed. I might even have it here. Here we
go. Okay. Can I ask? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm assuming you it's a thumbs up. But what?
Yeah.
What does that book mean to you? What do you make of it?
Well, it's full of just beautiful quotes that you can lift out, you know, which really get you to think about the nature. Well, I guess it's a meditation on the nature of art and the nature of cinema. And he also talks within it specifically about his films, but he talks about big, unfashionable things, which are really challenging for us these days. So, like, for example, there's this quote here. We got, just how offensive is this, right? We have almost totally lost sight of the beautiful as a criteria of art. In other words, of the aspiration to express the ideal. Every age is marked by the search for truth. Truth and beauty. My God, you'd get lynched today for saying such things.
Right. He sounds like a reactionary.
Yeah, right.
He does.
He'd be a spicy anon on the Bird website.
That's right. Just crazy that you read that. I had marked out a couple passages in here just in case they seemed appropriate, and that's the one I had my page open to, weirdly enough, which is a Tarkovskian kind of correspondence or coincidence for sure.
I feel really left out.
Yeah. There's a couple of my favorite. There's a couple of things in there that I have really sunk. And I'm just going to fanboy on that book for a minute. And you're right. There are so many moments that you could just pull out a few sentences and they're the kinds of things you could, put on a little postcard and just have sitting about.
Totally.
A couple of my favorite ones. He has a passage or a bit about pushing back on the notion that he makes experimental or has made experimental films, and I love that, where he's sort of like, just because you've never seen anything like it before doesn't mean it was an experiment. I wouldn't have put it out if it didn't work, right?
I think that's him taking a dig at Russian constructivism and Russian structuralism. I can't pronounce his name, Vertov, and the man with the movie camera and that noble tradition of Russian experimentation.
I love that.
And also he might have even been taking a bit of a swipe at being stuck in art house cinemas with experimental films in the 1960s and 70s.
I have to imagine there was a moment where like Tarkovsky watched like a Stan Brakhage film and was like,
Stan Brakhage film
was like, what
or Kenneth Anger,
Yeah,
like,
it's like,
or maybe even the Kuchar brothers.
Yeah, we gotta say rest in peace or whatever he wants for Kenneth Anger, who just recently passed away. Yeah, we'll eventually cover him. I don't know. He's probably rocking out in hell right now, having a wonderful time. But yeah, rest in peace.
I think hell was built for that man. So
yeah. I also wanted to ask you, and this is, I've been pondering this since we did our first episode, and Kevin, you may remember me bringing this up. So in the biography, or one of the biographies, this book, A Life on the Cross by Ludmila Boyadzeva, she makes the claim that Tarkovsky is diagnosable as autistic. And now I'm not expecting you to diagnose the man, but I'm just curious, like, I say that, does that?
Well, I think there's two things at work here, right? So one is the very contemporary problem of having to retro diagnose post hoc all artists with mental, conditions of one kind or another. So I just checked it out today. Autism including Michelangelo, Van Gogh, Bjork, Mozart, Michael Jackson, Beethoven, and Eminem. One website claiming they're all autistic, but none have been diagnosed.
Right. We should all be so lucky as to be autistic, apparently.
Well, I mean, if that's the company that you get to keep, but I think what's happening here is they're just describing incredibly life-focused artists. I mean, like, I'm like focused for life. Like, life's not as important as the art you make. So I think those are artists who are not just profoundly committed and devoted, but they survive through the art that they make. And I think to reduce that to autism or autism spectrum is just a little limiting.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I read that too, and it was like, well, it does feel like you're diminishing somehow this character. Like, part of the reason we do these shows are these figures are fascinating human stories about what a kind of person can be, whether or not they have some diagnosable condition. And in some respect, I don't care if you can diagnose it, right?
No, indeed. Yeah. It's interesting to look at the history of retro diagnoses of Van Gogh, because every generation there's a brand new trend in mental health diagnostics, and every generation he gets a new thing added. So he was bipolar, and then that got replaced by borderline personality disorder, and then it's schizoaffective disorder, and then actually maybe he just had major depression and ADHD, which has become very popular again, and now they're also saying he's autistic. I mean, if he can't be all these things, and if he can't be all these things, it's highly possible he's not any of them.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's interesting. And then it also kind of brings up this thing, sort of medicalizing these people. It's like, I'm always interested in the okay, so say he does fit these criteria. You've got, most of these conditions are a checklist of, behaviors or responses to things, right? That's how they do. It's not, nobody is sticking a light in your ear and saying, oh, yep, autism. There's, I found the autism part. Are these things even distinguishable from the personality traits that allow somebody like Tarkovsky to be Tarkovsky? He was obsessive, right?
Obsessive, but
you have to be to make film.
Yeah. And also to be someone who believes in spirituality. I guess we can say that about Tarkovsky.
I think so.
In a very anti-spiritual, materialist empire that he was living with within the Soviet Union. And then for him to find out when he got spat out the other side and into young capitalist Europe that was all very Americanized, there was a lack of spirituality there as well. So, this is a person struggling and obsessive, I think, about trying to represent his own spiritual cravings and insights in a world that didn't really give a damn about it. So I think that would really ratchet up the obsessiveness for an artist and the urgency,
Yeah.
Well, and this is a known type as well. I think you touched on it during the core episode, Brad. The Russian mystic it's a thing, and he seemed to embody that, or to exhibit that. And this is a bit of a pivot, but I kind of want to take it here. How do you both feel about him as a representative of the Russian soul, the Russian character. I know we're Westerners, such as it is, right? And Russia is always presented as kind of out there or over there. I don't personally feel that way, but that's sort of how it's framed. So do we feel like Tarkovsky's an accurate or solid representation, or is he more the exception that gives us unique insight into maybe a people that we're told we can't, or we might not even want to understand? Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of the Russian mysticism tradition, he was soaked in it all the way back to doing his movie about Andrei Rublev, the medieval, Russian Orthodox painter. And he depicts the crisis of faith that Rublev goes through. And then his father as well was a kind of mystical poet. And there's so much in Tarkovsky about land and about the sort of spiritual embodiment of grass and trees and homes and fire and rain and all these material things that he sort of brings to life in this amazing kind of sonorous soundscape where you're listening to the world and quite surprised by it because it has this presence. I think there's definitely whether it's Russian mysticism or whether it's just mysticism, I don't know. But I think if we were to characterize, the Russian soul, it would be mysticism with deep melancholy. And I think you definitely get that within Tarkovsky. There's this immense yearning that sort of takes in everything from, a planet billions of light years away, or, however far Solaris is away.
Right.
Like little blades of grass and bugs and the flow of water. It's like he's trying to find the same energy or living force within all these things in these films. So like for example, the use of wind and fire that appears in his movies. He's kind of saying, look at these things as I sculpt them in time. Look at these things alive. What is it for these things to be living, And is there some force guiding them,
I'm so struck by his use of the elements. It's weirdly my fixation in films and in narrative is how is the creator making use of the elements. And I make the argument that in every great epic, you have to have all four play a prominent role in some scene or another. And if you go back and watch, and it's not true of sort of kitchen sink dramas and that kind of thing, but anything that has like some real scale to it, it's always there. And Tarkovsky's always doing that. There's always a water scene or scenes, and there's always a land scene, of soil or rock, or in Stalker, it's often like concrete or something, and fire. And air, wind. And he knows exactly what these things. I don't even want to say the word mean, because to say what they mean is to suggest there's some one-to-one relationship to something else.
And I think he'd avoid that because he wanted you to sort of more enter a state. It was all about creating states of I guess. Even contemplation sounds too, right brain, it's more just
trance.
They're definitely trance-like. So in Stalker, where you get those incredible shots over those passages of water, and you're looking at all the things underneath, the coins, the fragments of tiles, there's a gun, there's some syringes, there's some mildew. And you're getting taken off into this sort of trance-like state. Yeah, definitely. In fact, you can look at these films as sort of bits of narrative between the trance states.
Yeah, right.
He was so fascinated by the trance state he could create, I think.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and he's always finding all the films are able. The driving scene that you talked about, driving through Tokyo, that's a bit of a trance state. Solaris has a bunch of them. I mean, I'm always moved by, even in Solaris, the opening scenes where Chris Calvin is at the farmhouse or whatever we call it, and he's looking into the pond with the sort of waving reeds. There's all kinds of moments like that where I'm gonna get, you're gonna get stuck in it. What does it mean? What is he trying to tell you? It's like, kind of shut up. let it happen to you.
And today you'd have producers would be leaning over his shoulder going, yeah, but it's not, because they've all read Save the Cat. They're
Right.
going, yeah, where's the cat in the first 10 minutes,
Right.
or the child, or the thing he's got to do to establish that the protagonist is a good, ethical, and likable character.
Right.
And,
it's so American.
Yeah. What are the what are the stakes here? What are the stakes in this scene? Yeah.
Just thinking at the start of Stalker, it sets up that he's going to sneak away and leave his wife behind, but he gets caught. So it's like the opposite of the American setup,
Yeah, that's a good point.
This guy's mean. He's a son of a bitch.
I love movies about mean sons of bitches. Taxi Driver, anybody?
Yeah.
Cinema seems to me to be, I mean, thank goodness that Tarkovsky as a soul or as a being, however you want to frame it, was embodied at the time that he had this art form to realize his creative vision. I wonder if he had been born a century earlier, if he would have been drawn to theater or probably to literature, he probably would have written. But cinema has that unique ability to evoke the dream.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and does beg the question that, had Tarkovsky lived, would he have been able to cope after making the sacrifice? Instead of dying of cancer, if he went on to live through the 80s and 90s, would he have liked the world around him? Would his financing have dried up? Would it have been possible for him to survive in the West? Would he have run back to Russia after the Berlin Wall fell? Would he have been welcome with open arms? There's now a Tarkovsky monument over there in Russia, which is kind of ironic since they were so shitty to him.
Right.
But I think he'd really have struggled to get financing, like others of his time. Godard really struggled, and Godard went off down a real little niche thing and just became like a little videographer of his own oddities, and Antonioni as well. He found it hard to get financing. Wim Wenders also really struggled.
That's crazy. You make Paris, Texas, and then
I know, but I think the big mistake he did was he became friends with Bono. And like Bono's the kiss of death for mostly. So then he was like, yeah, Bono, he's going to direct a script by Bono, which was Far Away So Close.
I don't know.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah. And then there was like all the music for U2 just flooded into Wim Wenders movies. And for like 5 years, he just became like Bono's sidekick,
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
What a way to go down in flames, man.
that song that they shoved on the iPhone will still sometimes play when I get in my car, and I've got to figure out how to make it stop. Yeah, I really do. Yeah.
They really should have been.
What a disaster.
They really, I think these days to do that, to hack into everyone's phone in the world and implant something, I think that would be in breach of the Patriot Act now.
Yeah.
Or like the Cyber Securities Act.
Something.
Sure.
It's one of the greater cultural crimes. It doesn't seem like a big deal if you're sitting in a marketing room and you're like, oh, what do we, but really, what an invasion.
Yeah, we've made a terrible mistake. GIF. I know we're bringing this in. This is another one of these dark rooms where I know we could talk with our guest, Ewan, for another 2 hours easily here. And we're going to come back for another 20, 30 minutes on the After Dark. Brad, what do you have teed up?
Yeah, sometimes I pull like an anecdote or something for this. I didn't quite do that. One thing I want to talk a little bit about is a little bit more about time in Tarkovsky films. Tarkovsky's theories of time. I've got some bits that I can read, but I think we'll be able to just talk about it. And then I also want to ask you, and a little bit related to Tarkovsky, but maybe more generally, the sort of perennial question about separating the art from the artist, because we learned in our core episode that Tarkovsky, genius though he was, would be best avoided in his personal life.
Sure. Yeah,
And I just want, I know Kevin has thoughts about this sort of thing. I know I do. It's part of the secret don't tell anybody thesis of our entire show. But I just want to kind of explore that with you, Ewan, as it relates to Tarkovsky. So we'll talk a little bit about those things and then whatever else comes up. Yeah.
Great fun. Really exciting and wonderful to meet you. This has been a pleasure so far, and we're going to do more of it on the After Dark.
And
where can people get it, Brad? Hey, I got to go. Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. I'm going to say it one more time. Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. We're trying to get to half a Crowley this year. 333 patrons. We're doing it. We're making it happen. We just did the live show. Check it out. Brad, what were you going to say?
Oh, I wanted to give Ewan an opportunity, to do any self promo he wants. If he doesn't want to do any, we're going to have links in the show notes.
Oh, spoil me and don't make me do it myself.
Okay, don't do it. Stop promoting yourself.
Fantastic.
Stop it right now.
It's the new way to promote yourself.
I love it.
It's to refuse. Yeah.
Follow the man on Twitter and help him get his next viral tweet about Russian art cinema. Really, this is how we save the culture. I'm not even kidding. If you can get somebody to go, who? Tarkovsky? They check it out. Maybe it opens up some young person's world, some old person's world. We're genuinely all about that on Art of Darkness. So we'll put a link to his Twitter account in the show notes. But do you just want to say your Twitter handle?
Oh, yeah. It's MrEwanMorrison.com.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to go during the short break here before we come back for the After Dark. I'm going to. Oh,
hold on. It's Mr. Ewan Morrison. There's no .com on it. It's just Mr. Ewan.
Mr. Ewan Morrison. Yeah.
You got it. It'll be in the show notes. You can't miss it. Yeah. No worries. And so I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to light a cigarette. So we got fire. I'm going to open the window. We got wind. I'm going to drink a glass of water.
Okay.
And I'm going to pet my pet rock. And I'm proving you wrong, Brad. A kitchen sink drama can have all the elements.
I'd love to see it. Film it. Let's see. We'll see if it's interesting.
I'll write one day.
Okay. Right. I like it.
We'll be back.
Cheers.